Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining for the 2022 edition of EXPO Chicago, the International Exposition of Contemporary and Modern Art. I'm Kate Sears-Butowski, Director of Programming, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the dialogue stage, present in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Dialogues offers panel descriptions, conversations, and provocative artistic discourse with leading artists, curators, designers, and arts professionals on current issues that engage them. This year, EXPO Chicago is proud to launch our inaugural Director Summit, a program that invites a diverse group of emerging art museum directors from across the United States for a 3-day program addressing the shifting dynamics of museum leadership today. Shaped in partnership with museum consultant Jill Snyder, a seasoned museum director, the Director Summit is centered on 2 public roundtable discussions on the dialogue stage. Today is the second and final conversation, with the first occurring yesterday. Both conversations will examine how to forge equitable and sustainable movement forward for art museums and institutions. A special thank you to our partners at Sotheby's, Toma Foundation, the University Club of Chicago, and the Terra Foundation for American Art. Please welcome Jill to the stage to introduce our panelists.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Kate, and to our sponsors. I'm really honored to launch this inaugural Directors Summit, and I want to bring our panelists up to the stage so we can get right to it. I'm just going to read their titles and their affiliation. If you want to learn more about them, you can go on EXPO's website where their bios are included. So, Miki Garcia is the director since 2017 of Arizona State University Art Museum. Welcome, Miki. Julie Rodrigues Widholm is the director since 2020 of the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, University of California, Berkeley. Welcome. Halona Norton-Westbrook is director and CEO since 2020 of the Honolulu Museum of Art. Welcome. And Louise Bernard is director since 2017 of the Obama Presidential Center Museum. Welcome. Hi.
Hi.
I'm really excited to be leading this conversation today and bursting at the seams to hear what you have to share. But first, let me just set the stage for our conversation. When we began our collective conversation 5 months ago, it was painfully evident that the past 2 years have been marked by a profound rupture to the status quo. And after years of well-intentioned, yet lagging attention by the museum field to confront systemic inequities, this rupture cleared away illusions about an old order that most agree is no longer fit for purpose. So this has been a painful moment, but it has made way for what has been incubating to emerge in clearer form. Above all, a rupture from the past demands choices about the foundations of the future. This Directors Summit, comprising 2 roundtables, as Kate said, one yesterday and one today, is designed to focus on this new foundation through the voices of an emerging generation of art museum leadership. These 8 directors are emblematic of an invigorated leadership, possessing equal measures of humility and curiosity, conviction, and vision. So given our time constraint to 1 short hour, I have asked each director to share one initiative that reflects foundational change. And following these 10-minute presentations, I then will moderate a conversation among them, and after that, we'll preserve some time to, at the end, to take questions from the audience. So let's begin with Miki.
Hi. So I'm just going to launch right into it. I'm at ASU University, which is University Art Museum, which is in Tempe, Arizona. And our vision statement, if you can see it, is that ASU Art Museum centers art and artists in the service of social good and community well-being. We categorically have a belief that our museum serves a social purpose of good to our communities. And to that end, we have inverted the notion that museums are about the care and stewardship of just objects, and rather that we put people over property and that we really think about that lens from which everything emanates. So what if people and their stories were the reason that we existed? That's really our motto here. So as I say, it really colors everything that we do. And one of the things that we do in this particular initiative is really how we think about the museum's lobby, its spaces. You know, I'm struck by the continual lip service that museums pay. I'm just going to be very forward because I think this is the moment and time to be blunt and transparent about how we're for everybody, we're for all. And yet, when I did a quick Google search of art museum lobbies in particular, I was struck. How many of you think about the last 3 museums you've visited? They all have a sort of taste, a high-class quality. You know, terrazzo floors and mid-century furniture and $10 espressos and, you know, Italian paninis. I mean, from Dubai to Shanghai to Phoenix, Arizona, all museums that you enter have this kind of, taste. And I, as someone who didn't grow up in this kind of space, I think about who are these designed for? And if we say we're for everybody, what are the signals and signs and messages really that are nonverbal that say we are for you? This looks like these images look like an extension of a fancy collector's living room, certainly not my grandmother's living room, certainly not my aunt and uncle's places where they feel comfortable. So this was a moment for us at the museum to think about, who feels comfortable here, and what are we saying in the interstitial moments about our places. So this is the ASU Art Museum. It was built in 1990 by Antoine Prédoc with the concept of Garcia Lorca's notion of sol y sombra, sun and shade, which is very much about place, about our place in the Sonoran Desert in Phoenix, Arizona. And we continue to use the space to invite you to think about where you are. And right now people are thinking about land acknowledgements and other kinds of performance-based ways to think about place, but we really take that to heart in terms of when you come to our museum, are you at any museum USA or are you at our museum, at our space, on our place, and are we welcoming you from that vantage point? Let's see. So that's a work by Leo Villarreal called Point Cloud ASU that he did with students and during the pandemic. And then those are Eduardo Sarabia's boots that were inspired by the Sonoran Desert and Nogales in our border region. Let's see. The other thing I think is really important here, before I move the slide, is that at the museum we consider ourselves, all of the staff, culture workers, as place keepers, not just place makers, but really keepers of place and keepers of culture. And at Arizona State University, we are the largest, most comprehensive public research university in the country. We have over 100,000 learners online, but also across our campuses. We don't have one campus. We graduate more first-generation students than any other university in the country, more indigenous students, more veterans. We're very committed to both innovation but also inclusion. Our charter actually states we measure ourselves not by whom we exclude, but who we include and how well they succeed. It's important that we graduate more first gen. We don't accept more, but we graduate more, and that's really important to us as people's success at our university. So when we were thinking about museums, we were thinking about lobbies. One of the things that I was really interested in, I've been at the museum for 4 years, and one of the things I was really interested in when I moved to Phoenix and having lived on both coasts is this amazing community of culture keepers that exist in Arizona. This is Jorge Torres. He runs a place in downtown Phoenix called Futuro Coffee, but it's a coffee shop, a They serve café de olla. He serves pozole on weekends. He makes zines, and he also has a hair salon in there. It's an art gallery. It's a community space. Really, this is a community keeper that we are in partnership with Jorge. But one of the things I realized, I'm a Gen Xer, and when I was in my 20s, I wanted to go to New York. And that's where CBGB was, and the East Village, and that was where culture was happening, and it was cheap. I could go there. And now so many young people are priced out of those coasts. And what's happening is I see that they're staying in their places. So I have I have the fortune of meeting so many poets and chefs and musicians and writers and artists that are from Arizona that are not leaving to New York. They don't want to be like another New York. They want it to be, they're exploring native seeds and indigenous food practices and climate change solutions from elders. They really are stewarding and keeping their culture. And so because of that, I feel like there's this flourishing of cities across America where people are doing that in Detroit, New Orleans, and Portland, and all these other places. So it's exciting that to have this kind of conversation during this moment where I feel like there's such a flourishing of people really having a hyper-local, specific honoring of place. So anyway, we this is our lobby. In the back is, I won't tell you everything, but one of the things Jorge said was, people like me want to go to the museum and buy art. So he created a series of limited edition prints with a Guatemalan artist, Juan Brenner, that start at $50. And we sold out like in the first week with so many kids, our university, who are having the experience of buying $50 prints, not $300 scarves, which, so many of our museums sell. And the other thing is, I passed out some incense. I wasn't allowed to burn incense, but when I think about nonverbal, as you walk into the museum, you get an embrace, because the project is called Embrace, and him and his partner Mario Gallego go by arena, which means sand. But what you hear are sounds from the Sonoran Desert and then smells. The incense are from a local architecture firm of Ocotillo, Spring Arroyo, Creosote, the smells of the desert. As you walk in, many people have said it's a religious experience. And then also our museum ambassadors have the limited edition prints, T-shirts as well. And then I'm just wrapping up because I see time is happening, but we don't just work with Jorge, we work with a number of culture keepers, and this is, for example, a place called For the People that's beloved in town, and we have a capsule collection in our shop that is all materials and retail merchandise that's all about the Sonoran Desert. For example, there's a calendar, and in the calendar, instead of just holidays, it's also like when the agave blooms, or different kinds of things to celebrate from our desert. So I could talk forever. This is also iterative and ongoing. It's a constant stewardship of ourselves as placekeepers. I think that's where I'll leave it.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be back in Chicago. It's amazing to be here. So I'm Julie Rodrigues Widholm, the director of Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. I would like to thank Jill Snyder for so very generously convening this summit. I think to have this generational dialogue and to provide a platform for us to present new ideas is so very generous of you, so thank you, Jill. This is really very meaningful. And thank you to my colleagues for being up here and part of this conversation. These are not easy conversations and ideas and things that we're putting forward, so I'm honored to be part of this group. So we are seeing a generational shift. I love that Miki mentioned Generation X. I'm similarly of Generation X and love that we have Gen X and millennials running our organizations now in a field that has been historically reticent to critique and change from within. I often think of this is dating myself really, but The Real World from the 1990s. Does anyone remember the tagline? Remember when people stopped being polite and started being real? So we're in a moment in the museum field where we're getting real. I mean, it is time for us to really face what hasn't been working in our field and to make change. So my priority as a leader is to champion art as an essential expression of our humanity. one that can connect us across differences and to give visibility to those whose lives and experiences are marginalized. And this has been my work, perhaps unspoken as a young curator, but deeply ingrained in the work that I do. I also believe deeply in the necessity of our art institutions as a space where this can happen. We can connect to each other across differences through art. Another main purpose of my work is to transform internal work culture at museums, to make museums healthier and more meaningful places for people to thrive. So many people enter our field with passion and purpose and leave due to burnout. We should be investing in our staff as our greatest resource. And this requires a lot that we haven't been doing historically. Training, management training, coaching, competitive salaries. There's a whole litany of things that we know we want to do and are trying to do to change the field and to develop the next generation of leaders. I'm so thankful to the Gen Zs out there who are demanding change that is necessary right now. I also speak generally in the first person about my work rather than a generalized institutional we, to be transparent about my work and my values that I bring to the role that I occupy. We all have different backgrounds and styles of being a museum director. As a museum director, we set an ethos for the entire museum, and our influence cannot be taken lightly. After 23 years in Chicago, in the summer of 2020, I took the role of director of UC Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, known as BAM-PFA. So my entire time there has been during the pandemic. I have the privilege of working with a staff of 60 full-time staff and hundreds of part-time staff and work-study students. At the #1 ranked, we were joking, ASU, UC Berkeley, we're all great public universities. Anyway, I'm very proud to be working at UC Berkeley. BAM-PFA's mission is to inspire the imagination, ignite critical dialogue, and activate community engagement through art, film, and other forms of creative expression. We are uniquely and equally focused on art and film within our program. We have a collection of about 28,000 artworks and 18,000 films and videos. We were founded in 1970, but we have a new building from 2016, which is depicted here on the border of campus and downtown Berkeley. And this was designed by Diller, Scafidio, and Renfro. The context in which I work, which also informs everything I do, is the historical seat of progressive social and civil rights movements in Berkeley, in the Bay Area, to include disability rights activism, LGBTQ, the Black Panthers, free speech movements, free love movements, all of it is in Berkeley, and that really does inform our work. Protest and dissent are part of our DNA, and my task, I think now, is to fearlessly listen, learn, and channel the protest, critique, and calls for change. So the title of my little talk here is Toward a Fearless Future, Embracing Art Exhibitions and Institutional Change, Institutional Critique as Catalysts for Change. And this is new work, right? I'm not saying I have the answers. I'm up here with propositions and experiments that we're trying here. Today, I'd like to share with you an example of critical dialogue from a project with artists we worked with recently, currently, and how artists can be partners in helping us catalyze the changes we want to see. This is an artist-curated project that models collaboration, equity, power sharing beyond a curatorial selection of artworks in the galleries. The exhibition is titled The Artist's Eye. It originated as a concept in 2019 by former BAM-PFA curator Apsara DeQuinzio. She invited 4 established Bay Area artists, actually East Bay artists, which is exciting to us in the Bay Area, John Zurier, Lava Thomas, Tammy Ray Carland, and David Huffman. These artist guest curators were supported by Claire Frost, Stephanie Canizzo, and Lynn Kimura, and BAM-PFA's new chief curator, Christina Yang. They were invited to curate from the collection, but this was also an invitation into the organization. Its archive, its exhibition history, its collecting history, and community relations. So one of the guest curator artists, Lava Thomas, curated a section focused on the museum's engagement with Black women in the collection, staff, and in the community. Thanks to her deep research into our archives and collection, she has included a significant work in our collection by Adrian Piper, titled Aspects of the Liberal Dilemma from 1978, which is in our collection, in her section. It was originally featured in a 1980 Matrix series at the Wadsworth Athenaeum. The work includes, it's basically an empty gallery with only this framed photograph depicted here quite small, maybe 12 by 12 inches, in the center of a wall. It's lit, and there's an audio recording of Adrian Piper's voice. So I'd like to point to this excerpt from Adrian Piper's brochure from the 80s. I'm going to read the first sentence. One reason for making and exhibiting a work is to induce a reaction or change in the viewer. And I would like to posit, what would it mean if working with artists on exhibitions or through our exhibitions, the work is to induce a reaction or change in the institution? So if working with artists actually will change the institution, and if we go into projects with that thinking. Okay, let's see. So here's just some shots of the different sections. Let's see. An exchange between artists and the museum is a relationship, oftentimes years in the making, and an openness to change promoted by the artist, the work, or the community engagement, I think, should be one of the goals of exhibition making. This takes courage, vulnerability, unlearning and relearning how we do what we do, and offers an exciting possibility to consider as we remain relevant. I want to point to, in my last slide here, part of Lava Thomas's section, she beautifully curated this wall of a tiny Mary Lovelace O'Neill drawing, 5 by 5 inch drawing, which is the only work of this artist in our collection. She was the first tenured Black art practice professor at UC Berkeley, and this is the only work we have of hers. So by using this opportunity that she had as the guest curator, she's making a statement and a critique of the museum, which is completely valid. I agree with her. I am absolutely working to get a major work by Mary Lovelace O'Neill into the collection, and I thank her for this opportunity. I'm really leaning into the critique that artists can bring, that our community can bring, to partner in ways that will allow us to galvanize our stakeholders, galvanize our boards to do the great work that we want to do together. Thank you.
Thank you. And just wanted to say thank you to Jill and echo that, and to my fellow panelists and to EXPO for having and convening this conversation. So thank you so much. I'm Halona Norton-Westbrook. I am the director of the Honolulu Museum of Art in Honolulu, Hawaii. And just thought we would start with a little sense of place. Because context is everything, but that is especially true of our museum, and there's special things about the place that we are. So Hawaii as a state has 1.4 million people. Just to put that in context, last night I looked up, Chicago has 2.7 million people. So the entire state is half the size of Chicago in terms of population. Our museum is located on Oahu, which is the most populated island. About 1 million people live there. Hawaii is the most diverse state in the nation. So there is no majority ethnic or racial group. It's all a minority. Everyone is all together. So it creates a really interesting balance and a very interesting context and beautiful context in which to operate. It's among the most remote geographic places in the world. And when you fly there 6 hours from the West Coast, you really, really understand that. And I think that, understanding that so many of the issues that we're facing all around the globe are kind of at a heightened intensity in Hawaii in terms of getting along with those who are different from us, who come from different backgrounds. There's an intense sort of sense of climate change and the mounting pressure related to that, and the inequity of wealth and distribution of resources, all in this small community. But there is a beautiful way of life in Hawaii that I really invite everyone to come and experience at least once. There is just a wonderful tolerance that pervades most interactions, and an acceptance of different viewpoints. And there's a wonderful cadence to life and how things are supposed to flow day to day and month to month and year to year. All that being said, it's a very, very hard place to make change. It's a place that's resistant to change, it's afraid of change, and there's really deep cultural and historic reasons for that. The Honolulu Museum of Art is nearly 100 years old. It was founded in 1927. About 10 years ago, the museum merged with a smaller contemporary museum in town, so 2 museums became 1. So over the course of recent years, there's been major changes at the staff level, major changes at the board level, and then also a syncing together of missions of two distinct organizations, and really trying to plot out what the future looks like that both kind of is respectful to the past but is not beholden to the past. So I arrived at the museum as director in January 2020 and was on the job for 10 weeks before COVID. And so that was a major change that swept in and challenged us to rethink what we were doing and what was going to be happening in the immediate months ahead of us. But one thing that we knew we wanted to do was create a strategic plan. So the museum has not had a strategic plan in 15 years. And so with all the change that had happened, both within the institution and around it and culturally, it was really time to create this new plan. We worked with the staff and the board over a really kind of long process of about 9 months. And I was the interim between that, talking to the staff, getting their feedback, feeding that to the board, taking what the board said and feeding that back to the staff until we came up with the architecture of our strategic plan, which was extremely simple. It talks about our values, about wanting to ground the work that we do in empathy and a focus on creativity. It's about a sense of place, and then it's about some very simple, broad, major initiatives that we want to put going forward. So we have both a museum and an art school, and it's very important as part of the strategic plan that those things feel knitted together intimately, conceptually, that there's not a separation, but there's an understanding that education and the collection are deeply connected to each other. So we created this strategic plan, and it was a wonderful process bringing together the staff and the board. And then we thought, now we have to share it with the community. So, we had our beautiful pamphlets that we made. We put it on our website. And then, we had a lot of deep conversations about, is this enough? And we decided it absolutely was not. That we needed to have conversations within our community to explain what the strategic plan was, and also to have people understand what the context was for the strategic plan. Because an interesting thing happened that when we would talk to people about the strategic plan, depending on where they were in their affection or proximity to the museum, they either thought that the plan was way too radical or that the plan had nothing in it. The exact same basic plan was perceived that way. So we thought, we've got some work to do here. And what we decided to do was myself and my director of learning and engagement, Erin Padilla, and two of our board members, Mike Watanabe and Kaili Chun, all three of whom grew up in Hawaii, deeply connected to the community in different ways. We decided to host a series of town halls, and the town halls were small, 10 people or 12 people. That was the maximum number of people. And we invited people intentionally who we knew did not agree with one another. And some people who were very supportive of the direction we were going, and other people who had questions about the direction where we were going. And we brought these folks together and had the sort of basic parameters of the conversation, that we were going to talk about the plan, explain the intention, explain the process, but really didn't set it up or formalize it beyond that. And this has just turned out to be the most kind of incredible, rewarding, and enriching process and practice for us, because we're finding out all sorts of new things that we never knew and understanding the direction that we need to go. We're being challenged at times, but we're also getting buy-in at a level that's just not possible unless it's face-to-face and person-to-person. So that was what I wanted to share with you today.
Hello, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. I will echo thanks to Jill, to my fellow panelists, to EXPO for convening this panel. I will come to this question, or the set of questions that we're exploring, from a slightly different angle, in as much as I am the founding director of a museum that has yet to be fully realized. It is a construction project, so to speak. So I'm the founding director of the Obama Presidential Center Museum. I'm going to turn here to the idea of democratic space making, thinking about Miki's idea of space keeping simultaneously. So as the first truly urban presidential museum, the work of the Obama Presidential Center is grounded in the power of place. by which we mean the iconic presence of Chicago and the Black metropolis. It's also grounded in the national and global stories that have shaped and continue to influence the life and legacy of Barack and Michelle Obama. While the museum will privilege the telling of a nuanced history and will foreground the power of objects to illuminate key aspects of the human experience, the central mission of civic engagement, of the relationship between individual agency and collective action, opens up space for the visitor to investigate, curate, and forge their own connections between past and present. The Presidential Museum of the Future, therefore, throws into sharp relief key questions about museum making. Excuse me, a dry throat here. And the forging of a non-partisan space that is at once flexible, participatory, inclusive, and inspirational. One of the questions that we often ask about the framing of a center is this idea of a campus. But we don't want to think about the idea of campus as being attached to encampment or an idea of enclosure, a barrier to people who don't feel that they belong. Rather, we want to think about a civic or creative commons, where local Chicago residents and visitors, estimated at some 700,000 people a year from across the country and around the world, will gather to share experiences and ideas and to participate in the timely, ongoing work of collective action. In this regard, the museum functions as the de facto anchor of the Obama Presidential Center. It's the most public-facing manifestation in physical terms of the ideals and mandates bound up in the Obama Foundation's core mission of civic engagement and the training of future change makers premised upon a values-based leadership framework. It will exist then as a platform not only for people already actively engaged in the public sphere, but in service to a general audience of all ages, some of whom may be coming to this history or this sense of connection and purpose for the first time. It's important to note that this new museum will also join a consortium of other institutions within the environs of what is referred to as a Museum Campus South. Institutions such as the Museum of Science and Industry and the DeSable Museum of African American History. And we want to understand through ongoing dialogue with our colleagues the sort of connections that might be forged between our respective platforms and programs. So what you see here in this diagram, drawing from this idea of democratic space making, are three central buildings represented diagrammatically that embrace a central plaza. So we have the museum building, a building that we call a forum that kind of houses a set of multi-purpose programming spaces. And then importantly, we have a branch of the Chicago Public Library, really unpacking that idea of a presidential library. So we think about the public library as a place for knowledge formation and circulation. It is accessible and open to all. Importantly, we want to think about how these amenities will best serve a range of visitors and that Southside residents, our neighbors, feel a sense of true ownership and participation. So turning to the idea of storytelling, we know that storytelling goes to the heart of any museum, yet storytelling is also a key element of the work in grassroots organizing, and it has been central to the work of President Obama, beginning with his work as a community organizer on the South Side, but also in his work as a writer. He is a writer and thinker par excellence. It's storytelling that helps us to make sense of the connection between individual agency, the story of self, and collective action, the means by which a vibrant democracy is lived and practiced. And here you see a kind of narrative distillation of the project, the various narratives that are woven together to explain this overarching sense of democratic practice. So notably, we're not an art museum per se, but we seek to leverage the way in which President and Mrs. Obama made a conscious decision to privilege the role of the arts at the White House As you may be aware, they rehung collections on loan from the National Gallery. They invited artists, writers, painters, musicians, dancers, designers to enter the space as active collaborators on pressing social issues and to mentor youth in the act of giving back. We therefore think about how art-based programs will invigorate the otherwise insular corridors of presidential history. And the goal is always to build upon these associations and to think expansively. You see here the remarkable portraits by Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherald. These are now on tour, as many of you will know, currently at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. And that tour began here in Chicago at the Art Institute last summer. The Obama Foundation had the privilege of collaborating with the Art Institute, the important thing being that we were leveraging our community networks and partnerships to ensure that residents on the often underserved south and west sides of the city had direct access to the portraits. There was also a fantastic Bisa Butler show that was on view as a dynamic companion. The idea being that we need to find ways to break down ideological barriers to entry, that we open up the threshold into spaces that can feel unnecessarily opaque or forbidding for some people, especially young people, who may not consider themselves to be museum goers. Once you make that intervention to foreground an experience that immediately resonates with a viewer, coupled with the mindful work of forging a sense of hospitality and a culture of belonging, then you can begin to build a connection that actively encourages repeat visitorship. But as we have learned, you have to meet people where they are and to give them a sense of trust. On the right, you can see a view of Rob Pruitt's The Obama Paintings installation at the Stony Island Arts Bank. I'll just mention quickly that this was the founding of our community collections gathering events that were hosted in partnership with Rebuild. We set up a physical model of the Obama Presidential Center with VR headsets. We had an info booth that was staffed by members of the Foundation's community engagement team. We had analog activities facilitated by the education team, provided light snacks. We invited local community members then to share materials with us that we would consider for inclusion in the museum's collection. All of this was done in the spirit of what we might call conviviality, ensuring that people felt very much a part of the project that we're building. You can see here some of the interaction that we had around this concept of community collections gathering. We documented artifacts to consider for our museum collection, and in doing so, we collected participant oral histories, as well as these wonderful photographic portraits of community members with their representative objects. And you can see a range of those materials here. There's a local artist with her work. There's a selection of printed matter, such as comic books, textiles, such as a T-shirt with iconography, and then this beautiful native Hawaiian featherwork necklace, including the rising sun logo as a motif. I will say that we made various stops. We started here in Chicago at Rebuild. We went to Iowa, made 3 stops there, and then partnered with the Bishop Museum in Honolulu. We also engaged this community gathering collections work through our online portal. The important thing being that we were able to effectively crowdsource a collection that speaks back to the very grassroots, community-driven sentiment, which is simultaneously the narrative of the story that we seek to tell at the museum. Obviously, I want to underscore that I certainly didn't do any of this work single-handedly. It was driven by deeply collaborative work with with members of my own team, but certainly across the foundation and with external partners and willing volunteers. And then just very quickly in closing, speaking to the importance of art commissions at the Obama Presidential Center, just to come back to this particular space. We will be unveiling an announcement later this year of the other commissions. This is one special announcement that we made in February as part of Black History Month, this wonderful sculpture by Chicago luminary Richard Hunt. The book Bird sculpture will live in the Chicago Public Library branch reading garden. So just to give you a little bit of insight into the project to come. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. And I think everyone probably shares the observation of the incredible range of these initiatives and how much they are grounded in the culture of place and of your institution and its missions. You know, I love you talking about the DNA of protest and your invitation to the communities that surround you and the mission and values of the Obama Presidential Center. So, and I think that was sort of one of the underlying goals of this summit, was to say that the practice of change has to be hyperlocal and grounded in the specificity. But what I'd like to do is kind of turn it on its head, because for each of these roundtables, I asked you as a group to identify a unifying theme that we can talk about more broadly, right? And so this group observed that what you do share is generally this idea of decentering traditional power dynamics, and that the themes that came from that conversation were recentering the base around community, and that making it inclusive, and also to demonstrate that impact through the work. And what I'd like to do is ask you to talk a little more about that, but in particular, I'm also interested when we say to decenter traditional power dynamics. What I'm kind of curious, like, who got decentered? In order to recenter, where did the shift in placement happen, and how did you handle those the barriers and the resistance and the friction in that I'm sure inevitably came in challenging what were established norms within each of your institutions? You're all making those kinds of cultural shifts. So it's not just what are you moving toward, but what did you have to do in order to navigate through the resistances?
Okay, I'll start, but I'm thinking about that question. Yes, I think all of us, and even some of the speakers yesterday, were thinking about decentering. I was just having a conversation with two artists who I just saw earlier, Leo Mars and Andrew Roberts, about a notion that a friend of mine who's an activist taught me about what colonizing means and what the sort of notion of a colonial mindset. And it's, if you are someone, or if an institution, for example, meets another and that other gets changed, but you fundamentally don't get changed, that's a colonizing mindset. And in my experience, a lot of museums, my experience in museums is that it is very much about us as power keepers, as experts, as holders of knowledge. And we invite you in as if it doesn't belong to you already, but we invite you in, and you come in, and then we'll tell you about what is what. And then you go off changed, but we stay fundamentally the same. And so I think there's resistance, obviously, to keeping power, because for me, the resistance isn't really this like kind of rebellious resistance. I work in a university that's all about innovation and disruption and breaking things, so I'm very supported in the way that I work and work in museums. I think, though, that the resistance actually comes in like sharp, like death by 1,000 paper cuts, because myself and all of my staff, we are all trained to be like museum workers. So the way we think, like writing a label or entering a gender into the TMS system, is all something we've been trained to do. And to stop and rethink about the way that we're doing it from an equity perspective is exhausting and tiring. And, and every single time we have to do something, we're already so overworked and we already have too much to do. And I think that's the hardest resistance, or the challenge that I have, is stopping and thinking. And change comes in very, very, very slow increments. So that's what I would say.
I'll give the example with the Artist's Eye in particular, where we had 4 guest curators collaborating on one show that had distinct sections that they curated. And so even kind of decentering the notion of single authorship and embracing a kind of multiplicity of voices and narratives within one exhibition. I think to your point, it is this sort of almost decentering museum traditions or challenging them, which is necessary. I mean, we just have to question and bring questions into our work in a transparent public way. And in some ways, I think the notion of expertise and knowledge is also, I don't know if decentering is the right word, but it's being shared, right? So having 4 guest curator artists bring their lived experience and their knowledge and their passions and their interests into creating a narrative for our viewers. But also I engage with them in a, I think, beautiful collaboration to help us build the collection. So I asked them to give us the names of artists, to suggest artists that we should acquire for the collection who are not yet in the collection. And I'm new to Berkeley, and they've been in Berkeley for decades. So they, at this point, know more about sort of the needs of the community, the interests, the lack in our collection, since they had spent a couple years delving into the collection. And then we put our very limited acquisition funds into buying work by the artists they suggested, and those artworks were in their show. And so they are shaping the collection in a way that is on par with what a curator would do, curator with a, advanced degree or whatever, and it's equally meaningful and equally important, if not more so, that they can contribute and participate in the shaping of our museums.
Yeah, I think those are great observations, and just building upon that, I think one of the things that strikes me listening to everybody up here and the panelists yesterday was that we're all grappling with these similar issues, but every museum is so unique in and of itself. It has a unique place, it has a unique context. And I think in the context of the Honolulu Museum of Art, there has been this sort of dual tension on one hand to innovate, to become 21st century in all the best ways. But then also we need to just sort of invest in some professional practices that haven't been available to us because we are in a very isolated area, and it's just taken time for those things to migrate to our museum. And so it's sort of balancing that professionalizing of practices with being innovative, being different, and letting the sort of wisdom that we need to take us forward come from many, many different areas, from our community, from the staff, from the trustees, and understand that all of those different groups, and of course individuals within those different groups, have really valuable, important perspectives that are actually going to collectively lead us to the best place if we can have the patience to listen and have the conversation and take our time to get there. And so I think it's a messy process, but it's what bears the best and greatest result in the end.
Yeah, I would add to each of those observations. I think one of the complexities of being a new build institution is the fear of a shift in a particular kind of power dynamic within a neighborhood that is connected to overdevelopment, to gentrification, to displacement. So really thinking about how we harness the idea of a center in a way that feels situated in community. And I say that because there is the expectation that there's some 700,000 or so people coming to the center every year, will be coming from across the country, from around the world, but ensuring that there is that sense of agency between community and the idea of a center, that the amenities that we present are connected to community agency, and so that there is immediate sense of connection for those who live in the environment in which we're building. So that has meant conversation, dialogue, listening, a very focused understanding of the kind of urban planning that needs to take place. And I think a recognition of our own power dynamic in terms of having a kind of global brand and ensuring that we return to that idea of locality, or what Brian Stevenson might call proximity, the importance of proximity to an issue, to a culture, to a community, to a group of people. So it takes time, as you've all mentioned. to really engage and to listen. But that's something that we hope to do, obviously, through collaboration, that we're not kind of swooping in to be the only kind of power in town, to have that sense of collaboration undergird everything that we do. And certainly through the idea of crowdsourcing a collection, for example, as being one way to do that, and to work with the concept of resistance.
Thank you. Really interesting. All, again, centered in your own institutions. I'd like to maybe pivot now to the audience and see if there are questions that you might have for our panelists. And I know that we have a mic that will be passed around so that we can hear your question. So raise your hand if you would like to ask a question.
Right behind you. Oh, good.
Thank you. What I've gathered from a lot of what all of you are saying is that there's a need for inclusion, if that's correct. And with that inclusion, we're talking about, places that are all over the world. For instance, we're talking in the U.S. But one of my concerns is with inclusion, it's not just space related or property related. It's really about the arts and the connection that the artist has to the audience, and how is that being addressed in terms of the actual to the actual appeal of, for lack of better words, product.
So is the question specifically about the collection and how you build inclusion through collections, or the opportunities to do that?
So the challenge that I see is, and what I'm trying to understand is that it's inclusionary from the perspective of being a community-based, right, and creating something that is that's appealing to, to everyone. So, at what point does the actual paintings or, exhibit, is that an important piece to you, or is it just mostly location? Because I think the real piece is drawing a minority of people in so they can reflect and see themselves in the work, in the museum. So how is that being addressed in terms of change?
Yes, I'm sure we're all working on that in different ways. We all each only had 8 minutes, so we were trying to, focus our remarks. But I think that is crucial, right? I mean, from my perspective at the Honolulu Museum of Art, the collection, the objects, that's what people come to see. That's where people have the most immediate emotional connection, and they need to see themselves reflected in the works that we have and we collect. And through the narratives that we tell and through the multifaceted dimension of the narratives that we tell. So it's not a singular narrative, and it's not necessarily an authoritative narrative. It can be a shared narrative. So I think that we could probably easily stay up here for an hour and talk about that as well, which I think is such a good point that you raise.
Oh, I was just going to add, and I think it's important to understand that the museum in and of itself is not a static thing, right? It's constantly evolving and taking shape through people. The buildings are people, programs are people, the evolving nature of a collection over time. And so I think there's something to be said for that kind of sense of duration, and certainly a future forward thinking about what the museum is, the vision that you're reaching for. And so that work is always ongoing. It's always in progress. It is a practice over time.
If I understand your question correctly about the galleries and the artists, my personal observation, having worked in museums for over 20 years, is that the galleries are almost the easiest place for a museum to pretend to be diverse and inclusive, because they'll put on a show of a Black artist or a Latinx artist and say, "See, we're inclusive," but the dynamics, the system is not. And so, for me, what I'm really absolutely committed to collecting and exhibiting all people's stories, and even the stories that weren't collected or couldn't have even been made, even kind of naming loss. as well as part of our history. But we have to go further than the galleries, I think. Just the way that we approach education, the way we approach who we're in partnership with, or even the way that we approach, like a lot of us, we're like, we worked with so-and-so, aren't we great? As though that shouldn't be the standard and the best practice. So I think that, yes, the galleries are really important, but, I see in the galleries so many missteps and good intentions. There's a big difference between intention and impact. And, so many good intentions where, I'll have people say like, oh, there's a Frida Kahlo show, so let's do a bilingual and let's advertise it. But then the next show is Max Ernst. Why wouldn't Latinos like that too? So I think in the galleries there's a lot of room, but for me it's really about the thinking and the personal accountability that each of the staff members are going through. And then the galleries should be a manifestation of the soul of the institution, if that makes sense.
I'll just add briefly that I think all of the conversations we're having, well, at least I think for myself, I'll speak for myself and my institution, all of these questions around community collaborations and inclusion are first and foremost foundationally to center art and artists in the work of social change. Right, we will never lose that commitment to art and artists. We're just expanding what that looks like, and importantly, the structures of conversation and dialogue within the museum, and then with our communities around the museum, is kind of a new model that I think many of us are trying to work on. Is opening up that dialogue.
Thank you so much. This has been absolutely thrilling. As a graduate of Berkeley in 1965, I'm really delighted that you are talking about change and social consciousness as the focus of the museum. And I am a resident of Hyde Park, so I am so looking forward to the Obama Foundation coming and the work you are doing already with young men, young African-American men in developing leadership and so on. So it's really a very exciting time to be alive in Chicago, I think. I'm interested in the way you focus your work on new lenses, because I think the old art still works, but it's the lens we use that can change and elicit new and more interesting dynamics. And even the way we place art in adjacent ways so that the art itself talks to each other in opening up new conversations. I think what we want is the new conversation starting.
Exactly.
Lots of head nodding.
Totally agree. Yeah. Right on.
Question in the back.
Sneak through.
Thanks very much. Hi, thank you very much. It's been a fascinating discussion. I'm an artist who works with institutional critique and works with museums quite a lot. And we're talking about decentering, and I'm conscious quite often when an artist comes in, their viewpoint will be named as the artist's viewpoint, whereas status quo in the museum will be anonymous labels that come down like the voice of God and should not be argued with. Do you think it's time that museums curators start signing their labels so we know it's an opinion and we know it's coming from a particular point of view and maybe a particular background, and this anonymity that museums have used for so long is due for a rethink?
Yes, I'm all for transparency in acknowledging the individual lives and humans who are putting together exhibitions and what their interests and values and experiences are, and having their names attached to exhibitions. And the title wall is standard practice, but as labels, I mean, that's a really interesting point. Like, how do we undermine this anonymous authority of the institution and really personalize it and make sure there's an understanding of who is speaking? And having multiple labels in a gallery, I think, is interesting. To have multiple voices interpreting and having the meanings flexible and fluid. I think it's a great idea. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we just did a project in COVID at the museum where we reinstalled our modern contemporary collection and had, the more traditional labels of the kind you're talking about. But we also invited community members to contribute to every single label their interpretation of the work of art. So everybody from teachers and first responders to there's a second grader talking about a work of art. And what was really sort of beautiful in that project was that you started to see people's feelings, anxieties, and fears about the pandemic come through. That was the particular lens in that moment of time, because we were all living in this sort of heightened state of fear. And I think to think about the museum, that's just a small project, but to think about the museum as a place for living dialogue and living ideas and how these objects can tell new stories all the time. We're always changing. And so the objects and how we see them, that changes as well. And so to have that be more alive in the museum space, I think is something that we all want.
Yeah, because of COVID, our schedule was off, and we had these weeks and weeks during the semester where the galleries weren't open. So we just had tours of the installation in progress, and we kind of announced it like a show, and people could come, and we had hard hat tours and did all kinds of projects like with the conservation lab and with the preparators, just to kind of break that idea. And we're also sort of breaking the fourth wall too, because our last exhibition, we actually hired a choreographer, someone who works in theater. Actually, he's from Chicago, Michael Road, if any of you know Michael Road. But we commissioned him to actually have an experience, kind of intervene in audiences' experiences of the galleries. So his approach, his lens around like questions or having you do things or make things throughout the run of the exhibition was this great thing, because it was like kind of meta, like I'm walking through the gallery and somebody's sort of walking through the gallery with me, and it was really great. We want to do it again. He wants to do it again too, so we'll see.
It'll be a BAM PFA.
Well, we are at the top of the hour, and I do want to thank our panelists, but I also would like to invite the 4 directors from yesterday, since you form a cohort of this 2-part conversation. If you might just stand up so we can acknowledge you as well, and thank you. And thank you so much, and thank you for being such an attentive audience. And I think it's just the feedback that we are getting from yesterday's conversation, and I'm sure continuing today, is how vital this conversation. And as you said, Louise, it is an iterative, ongoing inquiry, and I just admire the openness in which you all are endeavoring in your museum leadership. So thank you for that. All right, thanks.